The night was quiet, too quiet for a war zone. A thick mist rolled across the valley, swallowing the sounds of distant gunfire. In the command tent, maps lay scattered, radios crackled softly, and tired faces stared at blinking lights on the screen. Everyone believed the danger had passed, everyone except Lieutenant Mara Hayes. She'd seen something the others hadn't, a pattern in the enemy's movements. A silence that didn't feel like retreat, but like waiting. "They're not gone," she warned, her voice steady but urgent. The men around her exchanged tired looks. To them, Mara was brilliant, but cautious, too cautious. After weeks of tension and sleepless nights, no one wanted to believe another threat was coming. The colonel dismissed her gently, telling her to get some rest. But Mara couldn't. Something deep inside her told her this wasn't over. Outside, the air was heavy and cold. The platoon camped in the valley below, laughing, cooking, finally letting their guard down after days of chaos. They trusted their commanders. They trusted that the danger had passed. But Mara's instincts screamed otherwise. She studied the terrain one last time, the ridgeline, the shadows, the narrow paths leading down. Then she saw it. A flicker of light where there shouldn't be any. Her heart pounded. She rushed back to the radio, trying to reach command, but the signal was weak. Static filled the tent. "Sir, they're here," she said into the mic. "They're coming from the ridge." Silence answered her. She grabbed her gear, her weapon, sprinted toward the valley alone. By the time she reached the platoon, the night had turned alive with movement. Shapes in the fog. The quiet before the storm. The soldiers looked up, surprised to see her. "We need to move now," she shouted. Some hesitated, others followed instinct. Seconds later, the first explosion shattered the night. Chaos erupted. Flashes of fire, shouts, confusion. But in the middle of it all stood Mara, steady, focused, guiding them through the smoke. Every second counted. Every decision meant life or death. They hadn't believed her. Not until it was almost too late. And as dawn broke over the valley, the truth of what she'd done and what it cost her was only beginning to surface when the sun finally broke through the haze. The battlefield was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Smoke hung low, drifting over broken trees and scattered gear. The survivors moved carefully, their faces pale with shock. No one spoke much, but every glance seemed to say the same thing. If Mara hadn't come, none of them would still be here, hours later. As medics worked and the wounded were carried out, Mara stood apart, staring toward the ridge. She could still see the faint trails of movement in her mind, the enemy's quiet precision. How perfectly they'd planned the ambush. It wasn't luck that had saved her platoon. It was her refusal to ignore what she knew. Still, she couldn't shake one question. How had the enemy known their position so exactly? Back at the command post, her report was met with uneasy silence. The colonel, once so certain, now avoided her eyes. "You acted on instinct," he said finally. "It paid off. But let's keep this between us until we have proof." Proof. That word stayed with her, because deep down, Mara felt there was more to uncover, something inside their own ranks, as night fell again. She replayed every event in her mind, the strange radio interference, the missing patrol reports, the supply drop that had arrived hours late. Little things that hadn't seemed important before now lined up like pieces of a puzzle. Someone had known their route. Someone had wanted them vulnerable. The platoon was safe for now, but Mara knew this wasn't over. There were still too many questions, and one of them haunted her the most. If she was right about everything else, who could she trust next time? And somewhere, beyond the quiet hills, eyes were already watching her every move. The following day, the platoon was relocated to a temporary outpost near the edge of the forest. a quiet stretch of land that seemed far removed from the chaos of the night before. But for Mara, there was no peace. Every creak of the trees, every flicker of the radio signal kept her on edge. She couldn't rest, not when the unanswered questions lingered like a shadow over everything. She spent hours reviewing the communication logs and the satellite maps. One entry stood out, a message supposedly sent from her own unit hours before the ambush. But the timing didn't fit, and neither did the signal source. Someone had rerouted the transmission. Someone had made it look like it came from them. When she brought this to the colonel, he dismissed it as a technical glitch. "We've got enough real problems, Lieutenant," he said. "Let it go." But Mara couldn't. Her instincts told her it was no error. It was a warning she was never meant to see. That evening, she found herself sitting by the campfire with Corporal Diaz, one of the few who had stood by her during the attack. He was quiet, thoughtful, still shaken by what they'd survived. "You saved us," he said softly. "But I know that look, ma'am." "You think this isn't finished?" Mara nodded. "Because it isn't," she replied. "Someone out there knew exactly where we'd be, and they'll try again." Diaz frowned, staring into the flames. "Then we need to find out who's feeding them information." She looked toward the dark tree line, where the forest met the fog. Somewhere out there, the enemy was regrouping. But Mara had a feeling the real threat wasn't waiting in the woods. It was closer, hidden among them, wearing the same uniform. That night, the fog returned thicker than before, curling low across the ground like smoke. The camp was quiet except for the low hum of the generators and the soft crackle of the fire. Mara barely slept. She sat in the communications tent, watching the radio flicker with faint signals. Something felt wrong again, the same uneasy silence she had felt before the ambush. She checked the radar feed, scanning for movement, but the screens showed nothing. Still, her pulse quickened. She picked up the receiver and called for the nearest lookout post. No answer, just static. A chill ran through her. "Diaz," she whispered, stepping outside. "Get your gear." "We're checking the perimeter." They moved through the camp, flashlights cutting through the haze. The air was heavy, pressing down on them, every sound magnified, a twig snapping, boots brushing against dirt. When they reached the northern watchtower, it was empty. No guards. The equipment was still running, but the soldiers were gone. Mara's stomach turned. This wasn't an accident. Someone had disabled the post deliberately. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the tree line. A distant click, then silence. Mara signaled Diaz to take cover. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the shadows. The forest seemed alive, shifting. Then, through the mist, she saw them faint silhouettes moving in formation. Too precise to be random. She ducked behind a fallen log, whispering into her radio. "Command, this is Lieutenant Hayes. We have movement at the north perimeter. Multiple hostiles inbound." "Repeat, multiple hostiles." But the line stayed dead. No response. The realization hit her hard. Someone had jammed their communications again. Diaz turned to her, eyes wide. "Ma'am, they know we're here." And as the first flash of light broke through the fog, followed by the distant thud of approaching footsteps, Mara gripped her weapon and knew the fight wasn't about survival anymore. It was about uncovering the truth before it was buried with them. The forest exploded into motion. Shadows darted between the trees, flashes of movement that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Mara and Diaz took cover behind a ridge, firing warning shots into the mist to slow the advance. But this time, something felt different. The enemy wasn't attacking blindly. They were moving with purpose, almost as if they knew exactly where Mara would be. Through the chaos, her earpiece crackled, faint, distorted, but familiar. "Lieutenant Hayes, stand down." The voice froze her in place. It was the colonel. But the message wasn't coming through the secure channel. The signal was coming from outside the camp, closer to the ridge. She exchanged a glance with Diaz. "That can't be him," he said, shaking his head. "He's back at command." Mara wanted to believe that, but deep down she wasn't sure anymore. The gunfire faded for a moment, replaced by the eerie stillness of the fog. Then, out of nowhere, flares shot into the sky, red and white, signaling retreat. But the order hadn't come from her. It came from the same frequency that had issued the fake transmissions before the last ambush. Her stomach sank. This wasn't an enemy strike. It was a setup. They were being herded. "Diaz, fall back to the trucks," she shouted. "We're pulling everyone out of this sector now." But before they could move, the ground trembled. A blast tore through the northern line, throwing dirt and debris into the air. The fog glowed orange for a moment, then darkened again. Mara stumbled to her feet, coughing through the smoke. Her radio came alive once more, the same voice, calm and cold. "You should have stayed quiet, Lieutenant. You were never supposed to see this." The truth struck her all at once. The ambush, the missing reports, the silence from command. This wasn't a war against an outside enemy anymore. It was something far deeper, hidden within their own ranks. And whoever was behind it wasn't finished with her yet. The smoke was thick and hot as Mara stumbled through the wreckage. Calling for Diaz, her ears rang from the blast, her radio filled with static and fragments of voices shouting over one another. She could barely make sense of it, but one thing was clear: the camp was falling apart. Through the haze, she spotted Diaz dragging a wounded soldier toward cover. Relief washed over her, but it didn't last long. The enemy was closing in. Fast. Then she saw movement near the edge of the trees, a figure stepping out of the fog, holding a radio unit identical to hers. The man removed his helmet, and Mara froze. It was Captain Reese, her own communications officer, the one who'd been managing their encrypted channels since the mission began. His calm expression sent a chill down her spine. "So it was you," she said, raising her weapon. "You've been feeding them our positions." Reese smiled faintly, his voice steady. "You think this war is about territory, Lieutenant? It's about control. You weren't supposed to interfere." He stepped closer, lowering his weapon slightly, as if he knew she wouldn't shoot. "You could still walk away. Pretend you didn't see any of this." Mara's hands trembled, but her aim didn't falter. "You set us up. You almost got them all killed." He shrugged, almost casually. "Collateral damage." The colonel knew. The words hit her harder than the explosion had. For a moment, everything around her blurred. The shouts, the smoke, the chaos. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd feared. Reese lifted the radio again, signaling someone unseen in the distance. But before he could speak, Diaz appeared behind him, firing a single shot that shattered the radio and dropped Reese to the ground. Silence followed, heavy, final. The remaining hostiles scattered into the forest, leaving only the flicker of burning debris behind. Mara sank to her knees, exhaustion and disbelief washing over her. The platoon was safe, but the truth was far more dangerous than any battle as the medevac lights approached. Mara glanced at the broken radio, still sparking beside Reese's body. A faint transmission crackled through a calm, familiar voice she recognized instantly. "Lieutenant Hayes. This isn't over." The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. The platoon was relocated to a secure base far from the front lines, and the official reports labeled the incident as an enemy infiltration. But Mara knew better. Behind the polished language and briefings, the truth was buried, a truth that pointed to someone much higher than Captain Reese. The colonel's voice on that final transmission still echoed in her mind, calm and cold, as if reminding her that what she'd uncovered was only a fraction of something much larger. Diaz visited her in the infirmary a few days later. His arm was bandaged, but he was alive, and so were most of the platoon, thanks to her. "They'll never admit what really happened," he said quietly. Mara nodded. "Maybe not. But I've got copies of everything. The signal logs, the transmissions, even Reese's frequency trail. If they want silence, they'll have to earn it." There was no anger in her voice now. Only calm determination. When her orders for reassignment came, she packed her gear slowly, taking one last look at the fading camp beyond the wire fence. The valley that had nearly destroyed them was already overgrown, the scars of battle hidden beneath morning mist. It looked peaceful again, deceptively peaceful, as she boarded the transport. She glanced down at the small recorder in her hand, still carrying the faint trace of that final message. She slipped it into her pocket and whispered to herself, "Not yet." The engines roared to life, lifting the dust around her. The war would move on, and so would she, but the secrets buried in that valley would not stay hidden forever. And somewhere beyond the static, she knew someone was still listening. Don't stop here. The next story might just blow your mind. Subscribe, hit like, and share this with anyone who craves heart-pounding suspense and unforgettable twists.